"They want me dead," Apache Beauty whispered. The rancher stood firm. "Not while I'm alive." The ranch sat quietly among the hills, with cattle grazing calmly and the wind moving gently through the dry grasses. The rancher, a tall man with broad shoulders and weathered hands, worked steadily, mending a fence that had been damaged in the last storm. His life was simple and disciplined. He woke early, tended his animals, repaired the ranch, and lived alone with the quiet company of the land. He had learned long ago that life in the desert demanded patience and strength, but also respect for every living thing that shared the harsh landscape. As he tightened the last nail on the fence, a flicker of movement caught his eye. From the edge of the horizon, a small figure emerged, walking cautiously toward the ranch. The rancher squinted, his hand shielding his eyes from the fading sun. It was a young woman, her steps careful but determined, and she carried herself with a quiet grace. Her clothes were simple but worn, suggesting a journey that had taken days across the unforgiving terrain. The rancher's curiosity mixed with caution. Strangers rarely appeared here without reason. By the time she reached the ranch, the sky had turned a deep purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. The woman's dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes held a story of fear, courage, and something else the rancher could not quite name. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as if the desert itself might overhear her words. "They want me dead," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She paused, looking around as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. The rancher felt a sudden pull in his chest, a mixture of concern and responsibility. He had seen fear in many forms over the years, but there was something different about this woman. He could tell she was telling the truth, that she was in real danger. Without a word, he stepped forward, his presence calm but strong. "Not while I'm alive," he said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. The determination in his voice seemed to give her a small measure of relief. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes studying his face. She seemed unsure if she could trust him, yet there was an honesty in his stance and the steadiness of his gaze. Slowly, she nodded, realizing that this man, though a stranger, might be her only hope. She allowed herself to step closer, her feet kicking up small clouds of dust on the dry earth. The rancher noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion, the way her shoulders sagged slightly, the way her hands shook from holding her bag too tightly. She had clearly been running or hiding for a long time. He offered her a place to sit on the porch, a simple wooden structure that had weathered years of sun, wind, and storms. The boards creaked under her weight, but it was better than standing in the cold desert air. The rancher brought her a cup of water, the simple gesture carrying more meaning than words ever could. She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face, as if searching for a sign that she was truly safe. "Who is after you?" the rancher asked gently. His voice was steady, a grounding presence in the tense air around them. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if the night itself might be listening. "I cannot say everything yet," she replied softly. "But they are dangerous and they will not stop until they find me." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken fears. "I do not know why they want me, but I know I cannot face them alone." The rancher nodded slowly, understanding more than she might have expected. He had lived long enough to know that some threats could not be ignored, and some people could not face danger by themselves. There was a quiet strength in him, a sense of duty that had guided him through storms, droughts, and the loneliness of life on the ranch. He had always believed that protecting the innocent was not just an act of bravery, but an act of honor. And now, fate had placed this woman in his care. Night fell quickly in the desert, the sky darkening to a deep indigo dotted with countless stars. The wind whispered through the canyons and over the hills, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. The rancher prepared a small fire in the yard, its glow providing warmth and comfort. The woman sat near the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering light. She seemed to relax slightly, though the tension in her shoulders and the wary movements of her hands betrayed a constant readiness to flee if necessary. The rancher spoke little, letting silence fill the space between them. Words were not always necessary when danger loomed. Understanding could pass in glances, in small gestures, and in the way someone moved. He handed her a blanket when he noticed she shivered, and she accepted it with a nod of gratitude. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of safety, though she knew it was fragile and could be taken away in an instant. As they sat by the fire, the rancher began to ask questions, not about the danger itself, but about her journey, her life, and her experiences. She spoke cautiously, revealing fragments of her story, the places she had traveled, the people she had met, and the small joys and hardships she had endured along the way. He listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging, simply acknowledging her words with quiet encouragement. In turn, he shared stories of his own life on the ranch. The early mornings spent feeding cattle, the long hours repairing fences under the blazing sun, and the solitude that came with living in such an isolated place. His stories were simple, yet they carried a weight of experience and resilience. The woman listened with interest, perhaps surprised that someone could find satisfaction and peace in such a life. It was a reminder that strength could take many forms, and courage was not always loud or dramatic. It could be steady and quiet, like the rancher himself. Hours passed, and the fire burned low. The desert night was alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind across the hills. The woman's fear did not disappear, but it was tempered by the rancher's presence. She realized that he was a man who could not be easily swayed by threats or intimidation. His determination to protect her was clear, and it gave her a sense of hope she had not felt in a long time. Eventually, they agreed that she would stay in the small guest room of the ranch for the night. The rancher made sure the doors were secured and the windows were checked. He did not sleep right away, choosing instead to sit by the fire outside, keeping watch over the ranch and the woman he had vowed to protect. The stars above seemed endless, but they were a silent reminder of the vastness of the world and the dangers that lurked within it. Through the night, he thought about the responsibility he had taken on. Protecting someone was never simple, especially when danger was involved. But he also felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The woman's life depended on his vigilance, his courage, and his ability to remain calm under pressure, and he was determined not to fail her. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold, the woman stirred in her room. She emerged quietly, not wanting to disturb the rancher, but he was already there, waiting, ready to greet the new day. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange they understood one another. She had trust and he had resolve. Together they would face the unknown, whatever it might bring. The desert stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving, yet alive with possibility. And in that quiet morning light, the rancher knew that his life had changed in ways he could not yet imagine. A stranger had come to his ranch, carrying danger and fear, but also courage and hope. And he would stand firm, just as he had promised, ready to face whatever threats might come, protecting the woman until the last breath of danger had passed. The story of that first night on the ranch was only the beginning, a single moment in a journey that would test both their strength and their courage. But in the quiet of the desert, under the endless sky, a bond had been formed, one that would carry them through the trials to come. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, spilling light across the hills and the wide ranch. The rancher had already been awake for some time, moving quietly through his daily chores. The cattle were grazing peacefully, and the wind carried a faint scent of sage and dry earth. He was used to mornings like this, calm, routine, and predictable, but today was different. The young woman, the Apache visitor he had vowed to protect, was still on his mind. He knew that her presence was not just a matter of chance. Danger still lingered somewhere beyond the hills, and her life depended on careful planning and vigilance. She had woken early too, moving softly through the small guest room. She peeked through the window, watching the rancher work. There was something comforting in the rhythm of his actions, the quiet strength in his movements. She had spent many nights hiding, running from threats, and she had learned to mistrust almost everyone. But here, in this quiet desert ranch, she felt a small but growing sense of safety. She wrapped herself in the blanket the rancher had offered the night before and stepped outside. The morning air was cool on her skin, and the soft light made the hills glow gently. The rancher noticed her immediately. He gave a small nod, a silent greeting that required no words. She returned the nod, and in that simple gesture, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The day was beginning, and with it, the work of preparing for what might come. The rancher had already decided that she could not remain idle. If they were to survive the threats that stalked her, they both needed to learn from one another and prepare for the unknown. He began by showing her around the ranch. The fences were strong, but they needed reinforcement. The water supply was secure, but the buildings were open to the wind and could be easily spotted from a distance. Together, they checked every corner of the property, strengthening weak spots and making the place as safe as possible. She listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Her knowledge of the land, the desert, and survival tactics complemented his experience with ranch life and the animals he cared for. In a way, they were teaching one another without needing to say much. As they worked, they shared stories. The rancher spoke of the many years he had lived on the land, of the storms that had tested his endurance, and of the quiet satisfaction of seeing a new day begin. He spoke of the cattle, the crops, and the simple pleasures of life on a ranch. She listened with interest, asking questions about things she had never seen before. In return, she told him about her people, the traditions and knowledge passed down through generations, and the hardships she had endured while traveling. Her voice was calm but carried a weight of experience that far exceeded her years. Over time, the two of them began to develop routines. Mornings were spent repairing fences, checking on animals, and preparing supplies. Afternoons were used for learning survival skills from one another. She taught him how to move quietly through the desert, how to spot signs of nearby threats, and how to use natural landmarks to navigate safely. He taught her how to care for the animals, how to maintain the ranch, and how to improvise when supplies were limited. Their skills began to merge, forming a quiet but powerful partnership. The evenings brought reflection and conversation by the fire. They spoke less about danger and more about life, dreams, and hopes. She spoke of the moments when she felt alone and afraid, and the strength she found in small acts of courage. He spoke of solitude and the satisfaction of a life lived close to nature. In these moments, their bond deepened. Trust was growing, not through grand declarations, but through shared work, mutual respect, and the simple knowledge that each would stand for the other if danger came. Yet, despite these small comforts, fear was never far away. Strange signs began to appear around the ranch, footprints that did not belong to their animals, the sound of distant movement in the night, and signs of fires far beyond the hills. Each time they noticed these signs, they felt the tension rise, a reminder that the danger the woman had spoken of was real and relentless. The rancher did not show panic. He remained calm and methodical, a steady anchor in the rising storm. She too controlled her fear, relying on her instincts while learning from his experience. One afternoon, while they were checking the water supply, she suddenly stopped and pointed toward the horizon. "Look," she whispered. There in the distance, a small group of figures moved slowly through the hills. They were cautious, but there was no mistaking their purpose. They were searching for something or someone. The rancher studied them carefully, then returned his gaze to her. "Stay close," he said calmly. "We will prepare, but we will not panic." They spent the rest of the day reinforcing defenses, setting up quiet alarms using ropes and small bells to alert them to intruders, and planning escape routes in case the worst happened. Each task was done with precision and care. The rancher noticed how quickly she adapted to the ranch, how she combined her natural instincts with the practical skills he taught her. It gave him confidence that together they could face whatever threat might come. Night came, and with it, the desert seemed more alive than ever. The stars were bright above them, and the wind whispered through the hills. They sat by the fire, the orange glow illuminating their faces. Conversation turned to personal stories again, softer this time. She spoke of the small joys she had found even in dangerous times, the quiet beauty of sunrise, the sound of a river, the kindness of strangers. He spoke of moments of peace, of animals he had raised from birth, of sunsets that had moved him even after years on the land. Through these conversations, she began to see the rancher not just as a protector, but as a man of integrity and heart. He, in turn, admired her courage and intelligence. He had seen fear many times in his life, but he had rarely seen someone carry it with such quiet strength, using it to guide her decisions instead of letting it overwhelm her. They were learning from one another, not just survival skills, but lessons in trust, resilience, and human connection. The next few days followed a rhythm of preparation and training. They mapped the surrounding land, marking paths and noting areas that could be dangerous. They practiced moving quietly, observing the terrain and communicating silently. Each day, the bond between them grew stronger, built on mutual respect and shared experience. Even when the desert tested them with heat, wind, or unexpected storms, they worked together, adapting, learning, and relying on each other in ways that words alone could not express. One evening, as they sat watching the sun sink below the horizon, the woman spoke softly, almost to herself. "I have never stayed in one place for so long," she said. Her voice carried a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "It feels safe here, even though I know the danger is not far." The rancher nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Safety was fragile, but here, for the first time in a long journey, they had built a small haven. It was a place to rest, to plan, and to prepare for the uncertain days ahead. The rancher remained vigilant. Even in moments of calm, he knew that threats could appear without warning. But he also knew that preparation, courage, and trust could tip the balance in their favor. Together, he and the woman had created a partnership stronger than either had anticipated. She was learning to rely on him, and he was learning to rely on her instincts and knowledge. In the vast, unforgiving desert, they had found a way to survive and to grow stronger in the process. As night fell completely, the fire burned low, and the desert settled into quiet, except for the occasional distant howl of a coyote or the rustle of small animals. They sat side by side, sharing the warmth and the silent understanding that had developed between them. Words were no longer necessary to convey trust or resolve. Each knew the other would act if needed, without hesitation. The woman felt her fear lessen, replaced by a growing determination. She realized that together they could face more than just the unknown, they could face anything. The desert night stretched on, full of stars and quiet whispers of wind. The rancher and the woman, bound by circumstance and choice, had begun a journey that would test them, teach them, and change them forever. They were ready to face whatever came, with courage, trust, and an unwavering commitment to protect one another. And as the fire flickered and the desert slept around them, they knew that the bond they were forming was more than survival. It was hope, strength, and a promise that neither would face danger alone. Days passed quietly on the ranch, but the calm was fragile. The desert, beautiful as it was, carried secrets and dangers that could appear without warning. The rancher and the Apache woman had grown accustomed to their daily routines, repairing fences, checking on cattle and preparing food, but every glance toward the distant hills reminded them that they were not alone. Strange signs had begun to appear, footprints that did not match any animal, the occasional snapped branch, and small disturbances in the earth. The woman's instincts, honed from years of moving cautiously through the wilderness, told her that danger was near. One morning, as the sun rose with its usual golden light, the woman moved toward the perimeter of the ranch to inspect the southern fence. She noticed something unusual, footprints, partially hidden in the dust, leading toward the water trough. She called the rancher quietly. Together they studied the marks. They were fresh, and there were several, suggesting more than one person. Neither spoke for a moment. Silence was their ally. Both understood that panicking would only make them vulnerable. The rancher studied the landscape around them. "They are testing us," he said calmly, "trying to see what's here, what we have, and if we are ready." The woman nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the hills. "They are clever," she replied. "They will not reveal themselves fully until they think the moment is right. We have to be ready, or it will be too late." Their shared understanding created an unspoken bond. They were no longer simply two people. They were a team preparing to survive together. That afternoon, they reinforced their defenses. The rancher checked all doors and windows, while the woman used her knowledge of the desert to identify natural hiding spots, escape routes, and elevated vantage points. She showed him how to move quietly across the land, listening to every sound and watching for the slightest disturbance. He, in turn, taught her how to set up simple alarms using ropes and small cans that would rattle if anyone approached. Each step was deliberate, practiced, and precise. Even with these preparations, the tension was impossible to ignore. At night, the rancher would sit by the fire, watching the hills with a careful eye, while the woman sat beside him, her senses alert for any movement. The desert, which had seemed so peaceful before, now felt alive with unseen threats. The wind through the sagebrush sounded like whispers, and every shadow seemed to carry potential danger. Despite this, they continued to share stories, laughter, and small moments of calm. These moments were brief, but they reminded them why they fought so hard to stay safe. They were protecting not just life, but hope. One evening, while the sun was setting, the woman noticed smoke rising in the distance. It was subtle at first, a thin wisp barely visible against the pink sky, but it grew, twisting and curling toward the horizon. She immediately alerted the rancher. He examined it carefully, calculating distance and possible direction. "They are coming closer," he said. "We may not see them yet, but they are moving this way." Both felt a chill, not from fear alone, but from the realization that their preparations would soon be tested. Over the next few days, the presence of their pursuers became more apparent. Tracks appeared near the water trough and around the perimeter of the ranch. Small disturbances in the desert suggested movement during the night. The rancher and the woman spent long hours observing from high points, noting every detail, the pattern of footprints, the direction of wind, the movement of animals. Their partnership strengthened. They communicated without words, using gestures, glances, and quiet signals. Every action had meaning, and every movement was purposeful. One afternoon, the woman found a small bundle of leaves and twigs arranged in a way that indicated human activity. "They are practicing," she whispered. "They are trying to familiarize themselves with this land, to find weaknesses." The rancher nodded. "Then we will make sure there are none. Every weak point will be reinforced, and every approach will be monitored." Together, they worked tirelessly, checking fences, arranging supplies, and planning contingency routes. Each task, though physically exhausting, was done with the knowledge that preparation could save lives. As the threat grew closer, the woman's stories of survival became more than lessons. They became guidance. She taught the rancher how to hide, how to move without making sound, and how to read the land like a map of danger. He, in return, shared practical skills, how to reinforce shelter, manage resources, and think several steps ahead. Their skills complemented one another perfectly, forming a partnership built not on friendship alone, but on necessity, trust, and shared purpose. The nights became tense exercises in patience. They took turns keeping watch, sitting silently under the vast expanse of stars. Every sound was noted, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind, even the subtle movement of leaves. Each night tested their resolve, yet strengthened it as well. They learned to remain calm in the face of potential danger, to control fear, and to rely on each other's instincts. Trust became a shield, just as vital as the fences and alarms around the ranch. One night, the quiet was broken by a distant shout, followed by hurried footsteps. Both reacted instantly. The rancher signaled the woman to stay low while he moved toward the source of the noise, cautious but determined. She followed his instructions, observing from her hiding spot, heart racing but mind sharp. From her vantage point, she could see shadows moving along the ridges. There was no doubt they were being watched and they were being tested. The next day was filled with discussion and strategy. "We cannot wait for them to act," the rancher said. "We must anticipate their moves and be ready for anything." The woman agreed. They mapped the land carefully, marking possible paths of approach and escape routes. They set up observation points that allowed them to see for miles while remaining hidden. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated. The desert, once a quiet companion, had become a complex puzzle of survival, and they were determined to master it. Despite the looming threat, they found small moments of normalcy. They prepared meals together, tended the animals, and shared stories from their pasts. These moments were brief but precious, reminding them that life was more than fear and vigilance. The woman spoke of times when her people had celebrated victories and survived hardships with courage. The rancher shared stories of storms weathered alone, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived in harmony with the land. These stories, simple yet profound, kept their spirits steady amid growing tension. Then came the day when the first direct signs of pursuit were unmistakable. The tracks they had been monitoring for days converged near the ranch boundary. There was no longer doubt. They were being approached, and soon the test would be real. Both the rancher and the woman felt the adrenaline spike, but neither panicked. They had prepared, and preparation was their strength. Every fence, every lookout, and every small alarm had been set with care, and now it was time to rely on them. As evening fell, they sat together, reviewing the plans and preparing for nightfall. "They may try to come quietly, but we will see them," the woman said. The rancher nodded. "And if they make a mistake, they will regret it. We are ready." The words were calm, but behind them was a steel resolve. Each knew that survival depended not on luck, but on vigilance, planning, and trust. The desert night that followed was alive with tension. Shadows moved at the edges of vision, the wind carried strange sounds, and the rancher and the woman watched and waited. Hours passed slowly, each moment stretching as they anticipated the inevitable confrontation. The woman felt fear, but it was tempered by knowledge and the presence of someone she could rely on. The rancher felt responsibility, but it was tempered by preparation and courage. Together, they were ready, even as the unknown drew closer. And then finally, a faint sound broke the silence, a twig snapping, followed by a careful step. Both reacted instantly, moving with practiced precision. They were no longer simply waiting. They were acting as one, their partnership forged through days of preparation and trust. The desert, once a peaceful backdrop, had become a stage for a test of courage, strategy, and resilience. The outcome would not yet be decided, but one thing was certain. They would face it together, with courage, skill, and determination. The first signs of the hunters' approach were subtle, yet unmistakable. Shadows moved in the distance, carrying the promise of confrontation. But the rancher and the woman were ready. They had spent days learning, observing, and preparing. They had created plans, reinforced their position, and strengthened their bond. The desert itself, which had seemed so passive before, now played a role in their strategy. Every hill, every ridge, every hidden path was accounted for. As the night deepened, the tension became almost unbearable. Each sound, each shadow, each whisper of wind could signal the beginning of the confrontation they had been preparing for. Yet, even in the face of uncertainty, they were calm. Preparation, vigilance, and trust had created a fortress far stronger than the physical defenses of the ranch. And as they waited side by side, they knew that whatever happened, they would face it together, with courage and resolve, ready to protect one another at any cost. The desert night stretched endlessly, quiet and still except for the occasional rustle of the wind through the sagebrush. The rancher and the Apache woman remained alert, watching from the shadows, waiting for the first sign of danger. They had spent days preparing for this moment, reinforcing fences, setting up lookout points, and learning to move silently across the desert floor. Every detail had been planned, every weak spot addressed. Yet even with all their preparation, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. From a distance, faint shadows began to shift among the ridges. The woman's eyes narrowed. "They're close," she whispered. The rancher nodded, his jaw tight, his muscles coiled and ready. He had lived through harsh storms, long droughts, and countless nights alone in the desert, but nothing compared to the weight of protecting another person under threat. He glanced at her, noting her calm focus, the quiet confidence that came from experience and instinct. Together, they were ready. The first movements were subtle, a branch snapping here, a low murmur there. The hunters were approaching cautiously, likely expecting an easy target. They moved in small groups, testing the perimeter, looking for signs of weakness. The rancher signaled the woman to move to a higher vantage point while he stayed low, ready to observe and act. She slipped silently across the desert floor, blending with the shadows, her steps careful and deliberate. From her elevated position, she could see the intruders clearly. They were a small band of men, armed and intent, moving with careful precision. She relayed every detail to the rancher using small, subtle gestures they had developed over days of training. He studied their positions, noting the paths they were taking, the gaps in their formation, and the way they moved toward the ranch. Every moment required intense focus. One misstep could put both of them at risk. As the hunters drew closer to the fence, the rancher decided to test them. He moved slowly, making minimal noise, and shifted a small piece of equipment to create a subtle disturbance. A few of the hunters paused, their heads turning toward the sound. They whispered to one another, unsure of what they had seen. The rancher retreated quickly to a safe position, satisfied that he had drawn their attention and gauged their alertness. The woman watched carefully, ready to respond if the intruders tried to exploit any weakness. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a warning. The hunters continued their approach, moving cautiously, but the rancher and the woman were prepared. They had spent days anticipating this, and every action they had taken now contributed to their advantage. The desert itself became an ally, the hills providing cover, the uneven terrain slowing any attempt at a direct assault. Suddenly, one of the hunters attempted to climb the fence. The rancher was ready. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, and the intruder froze. The rancher's steady voice cut through the night air. "Stop! You will not come any closer." The man hesitated, then signaled to his companions. They paused, unsure, as the rancher moved with confidence and authority. He was unarmed in a traditional sense, but carried the strength of experience and the certainty of someone willing to protect what mattered most. The woman joined him quietly, emerging from the shadows with her calm but resolute stance. Her presence was unexpected, and it caused the hunters to hesitate further. They had anticipated an easy confrontation, but the pair before them was prepared, vigilant, and unyielding. Every instinct told the hunters that this would not be simple, that the rancher and the woman were ready for the fight ahead. Tension built as the intruders deliberated. They were aware now that stealth and surprise were no longer in their favor. The rancher maintained his calm, his eyes scanning every movement, his body ready to act at a moment's notice. The woman remained close, her experience guiding her through the standoff, watching for any signs of aggression and ready to support the rancher in any way necessary. After a tense moment, the hunters attempted to regroup, moving cautiously to encircle the ranch. The rancher and the woman had anticipated this and had already positioned themselves strategically. Small alarms they had set earlier began to rattle, signaling movement from multiple directions. The hunters realized that their approach had been detected and that the ranch was prepared for them. Frustration and fear began to show on their faces. The rancher spoke firmly, projecting his voice to reach the intruders without moving from cover. "You will not take her. Leave now and no harm will come to you. Stay, and you will regret it." His words carried authority and calm, yet also an unmistakable warning. The woman's presence reinforced the message. They were not alone, and they were ready to defend themselves with intelligence, strategy, and courage. For a long moment, nothing moved. The desert air was thick with tension, every small sound amplified. Then the intruders hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat. The rancher and the woman held their positions, unwavering. They had prepared for this moment and their determination was clear. The hunters had expected fear, weakness, or hesitation, but they found none. Instead, they faced two people united in purpose, prepared to protect one another at all costs. The first intrusion attempt failed. The hunters retreated slightly, reassessing the situation. The rancher and the woman remained vigilant, watching their movements closely. They understood that this was only the beginning of a test of endurance, strategy, and courage. Any misstep could have consequences, but their careful preparation gave them confidence. They had studied the land, reinforced their defenses, and practiced every possible scenario. They were ready. Throughout the night, the standoff continued. The hunters tested the ranch's defenses in small ways, probing for weaknesses. The rancher and the woman responded carefully, using silence, observation, and strategic movements to maintain the upper hand. They had created a system of signals, alarms, and positions that allowed them to act quickly while minimizing risk. The desert, once a passive backdrop, now served as a tool in their defense. By the early morning, the tension began to ease slightly. The hunters, realizing they had underestimated the rancher and the woman, began to withdraw. Their movements became cautious, hesitant, and eventually they disappeared beyond the hills. The immediate threat had passed, but both knew that this was only the first encounter. Danger was still present in the desert, and their vigilance could not waver. After the intruders left, the rancher and the woman moved carefully through the ranch, inspecting for any damage or overlooked weaknesses. They reinforced areas that had been tested and planned for future encounters. Every action was deliberate, thoughtful, and aimed at ensuring that they would remain safe no matter what came next. The shared experience strengthened their bond, creating trust forged in the crucible of danger. Despite the adrenaline and tension, there were moments of calm. They shared water, small meals, and quiet conversation, reflecting on what had occurred. The woman spoke of her relief and growing confidence, while the rancher noted her remarkable instincts and courage. Both understood that their survival depended not only on preparation, but on trust, cooperation, and the willingness to act decisively when necessary. By mid-morning, the desert returned to its usual quiet, but both remained vigilant. They continued their work, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and observing the landscape. Every movement, every sound was noted, every detail analyzed. They had proven their ability to withstand a direct threat, but they knew that continued vigilance was essential. The first confrontation had tested them, but it had also strengthened them. They had learned the limits of their endurance, the importance of strategy, and the value of working together. The rancher had demonstrated his unwavering commitment to protect her, while the woman had shown courage, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Together, they had turned a potential disaster into a display of resilience and unity. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the rancher and the woman sat together on the porch, the desert stretching endlessly before them. The events of the night had left them exhausted but stronger, more aware of the challenges ahead, and more confident in their partnership. They shared a quiet understanding. They could face danger, but only if they remained vigilant, prepared, and united. The desert, with its vastness and unpredictability, had tested them, but they had prevailed. The rancher had kept his promise, standing firm while protecting the woman, and she had proven that courage, skill, and trust could turn fear into strength. Together, they had faced the first true test of survival, and though the danger was far from over, they were ready for whatever might come next. The desert dawn arrived slowly, painting the hills and the ranch with soft shades of pink and gold. The night had been long and tense, but the immediate danger had passed. The rancher and the Apache woman moved carefully through the ranch, inspecting fences, water supplies, and the land around them. The signs of the intruders were subtle: disturbed dust, broken branches, and faint tracks, but they served as reminders that the threat was not gone, only delayed. Both of them were alert, their senses sharpened by the confrontation of the night before. The woman, once anxious and fearful, now carried herself with quiet confidence. The standoff had shown her that they could face danger together. She had learned from the rancher's steady approach, his patience, and his ability to act decisively without panic. At the same time, she had taught him to read the land differently, to anticipate threats, and to trust instincts that were not always based on visible evidence. Together, they had formed a partnership that went beyond simple survival. They had become a team in the truest sense of the word. They began the day by tending to the cattle, checking for injuries or signs of distress. The animals had been frightened by the noises and movements of the night, but under the rancher's calm guidance, they began to settle again. The woman helped him, moving gracefully among the animals, calming them with soft words and careful gestures. In those quiet moments, the desert seemed almost peaceful again. Yet both of them knew that the danger could return at any time, and that vigilance would remain a constant companion. Later, they sat together by the fire, sharing a simple breakfast. The rancher handed her a cup of warm tea, and she accepted it with a small smile. "We made it through the night," she said softly. The rancher nodded. "Yes, but we cannot forget that this is only the beginning. They may come again, but we are ready." The words were calm, but they carried a weight of determination and understanding. Each knew that survival depended not only on preparation, but on courage, trust, and the willingness to face fear without hesitation. After breakfast, they began planning for longer-term safety. The rancher suggested building additional barriers and setting up hidden observation points. The woman offered advice on natural camouflage and ways to make the ranch less visible from a distance. They worked side by side, moving with quiet efficiency. Every detail was important, every action purposeful. Even as they worked, they continued to share stories and reflections, their bond growing stronger with each passing hour. In the late morning, the woman spoke of her past in more detail. She shared stories of her people, of life in her village, and of the hardships she had endured while traveling through dangerous lands. She spoke of moments of fear and loss, but also of resilience, hope, and courage. The rancher listened intently, understanding more about her life and the strength she carried within. He realized that the courage she displayed now was built upon a lifetime of challenges, and that her presence on the ranch was not just a matter of chance. It was the meeting of two lives shaped by endurance and determination. The afternoon brought more practical work. They repaired fences, cleared debris, and reinforced areas that had been tested during the previous night's confrontation. The woman taught the rancher how to move quietly across the desert, to detect subtle signs of movement, and to anticipate potential threats. He taught her how to manage supplies efficiently, care for the animals, and maintain a shelter that could withstand sudden attacks or harsh weather. Each lesson strengthened not only their skills but their confidence in one another. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, the woman and the rancher paused to rest. They sat together on a small rise, looking out across the wide landscape. The ranch with its cattle and buildings lay below them, peaceful for the moment, yet surrounded by the vast and unpredictable desert. She spoke quietly, her voice thoughtful. "I never imagined I could feel this safe again," she said. "Even though the danger is still out there, I know we can face it together." The rancher nodded. "Safety is never permanent," he replied, "but courage, preparation, and trust make it possible to endure." Night fell, and the desert took on a serene, almost sacred quality. The stars appeared, twinkling like distant fires, and the wind moved gently through the hills. They sat together by a small fire, reflecting on the events that had brought them to this point. The woman thought about the hunters who had pursued her, about the fear she had carried, and about the moment when she had realized that someone would stand for her. The rancher thought about the responsibility he had accepted, the nights of vigilance, and the lessons he had learned from a woman whose courage matched his own. As they spoke, they both realized how much they had changed. The woman's fear had transformed into strength and confidence. She had learned that survival was not just about running or hiding. It was about preparation, strategy, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The rancher's understanding of danger and trust had deepened. He had learned to rely on instincts beyond his own experience, to value the guidance of someone with knowledge of the land that extended far beyond his own. Their partnership had grown into something neither had expected, a bond built on respect, courage, and shared experience. The following days were spent reinforcing the ranch further and preparing for the future. They dug additional water sources, strengthened the fences, and created hidden shelters where they could retreat if needed. They practiced moving quietly across the desert, communicating through subtle gestures, and maintaining vigilance without allowing fear to dominate their thoughts. Each day was challenging, but it was also a testament to their resilience and determination. During these days, the woman also began to find moments of peace. She explored the hills, observing the animals and the land, and allowed herself to feel a sense of connection with the ranch and the desert. The rancher watched her, noticing how she moved with confidence and grace, how her eyes took in every detail, and how her presence had become an integral part of the ranch. They shared small joys, watching a herd of deer in the distance, listening to the call of birds, or observing the changing colors of the sunset. These moments reminded them that life was worth protecting, and that courage was more than simply facing danger. It was also about embracing hope. One evening, as the sky darkened and stars appeared once more, the two of them sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. The woman spoke softly. "I never thought I would trust anyone again. I was alone so long." The rancher responded gently, "Trust is built slowly, through actions and choices. You have courage, and together we have proven that fear does not have to control us." They shared a quiet smile, understanding that their bond had become something rare and valuable, a connection forged not by circumstance alone, but by shared courage, respect, and survival. Weeks passed, and life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The threat of the hunters remained, but both the rancher and the woman were prepared. Their vigilance, skill, and partnership had transformed the ranch into a safe haven. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a landscape of possibility and resilience. They had learned to read its signs, respect its challenges, and use its features to their advantage. One morning, as the sun rose, the woman looked out across the hills and spoke. "I have learned more here than I ever imagined, not just about survival, but about courage, trust, and strength." The rancher nodded. "The desert teaches those who listen carefully." And we have listened well. There was a sense of quiet accomplishment between them, a recognition that they had faced danger, adapted, and survived together. In the evenings, they continued their routine of shared reflection, tending to the ranch and observing the desert. The woman found peace in her new surroundings, realizing that while the past could not be changed, the future could be shaped by courage, preparation, and trust. The rancher found satisfaction in knowing that his promise had been kept. He had stood firm, protected her life, and demonstrated that strength was not measured by fearlessness alone, but by commitment, patience, and action. The desert, with its vast horizon and quiet beauty, became a symbol of their journey. It had challenged them, tested them, and revealed their strengths and weaknesses. Through it all, they had learned the importance of preparation, trust, and partnership. They had faced danger, adapted to it, and emerged stronger because of it. The lessons they had learned would remain with them forever, shaping how they approached challenges, relationships, and life itself. As the sun set for the final time in this chapter of their journey, the rancher and the woman sat together, watching the horizon glow with shades of red and gold. They shared a quiet understanding that the world beyond the ranch would always hold dangers, but they had discovered a truth that was far more important. Courage, trust, and preparation could overcome fear, and partnerships forged in adversity could last a lifetime. The night was calm, the desert silent, and the stars bright above. They had survived, learned, and grown. The woman's life had been protected, and the rancher had fulfilled his vow. Together they had faced the unknown, and together they had prevailed. The story of the desert, the ranch, and the bond between these two extraordinary individuals would remain as a testament to courage, trust, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And in that quiet, starlit desert, they understood that their journey was not just about survival. It was about hope, resilience, and the unwavering promise that neither would face the dangers of the world alone.